Forumның құрметті қонақтары, біз осы баяндамаларымызды ары қарай жалғастырамыз. Қонақ баяндамашылар отырысының төрағасы Түркия Республикасы Хачетепе университетінің профессоры Уğur Ömürgün'ün қонағымызды ортаға шақырамыз. Uğur Bey, баяндамашыларды өзіңіз таныстырып өтсеңіз.
3. Avrasya Sosyal Bilimler Forumu'nu düzenleyen Türk dünyası üniversitelerinin değerli yöneticileri, değerli akademisyenler, diplomatlar ve değerli basın mensupları, tekrar hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyoruz. İki tane bu session'da konuşmacımız var, iki yabancı konuşmacımız. Bir tanesi İngilizce, bir tanesi de Rusça yapacaklar konuşmalarını. Ben şimdi bu oturumla ilgili açıklamalara geçmek istiyorum müsaadenizle. Actually, we have two speakers for this session. One is from United States, Professor Jeffrey Nugent from University of South California, and he's going to connect us with this internet facility. We have already checked it and it works. And the second speaker, Elena Kuzmina from Institute of Economics. Sorry, please.
Алена Михайловна Кузьмина, Ресей экономика институтының өкілі, саясат ғылымдарының кандидаты.
Okay, you're welcome. And she is going to speak in Russian, and her title is Industrial Cooperation in Common Economic Space as an Economic Modernization Factor. And first of all, we are going to connect with Professor Nugget in the States, and we have around 20-25 minutes for presentation, maybe 5 minutes for question and discussion. And later on we are going to move to the other speaker. Okay, we'll start with Professor Nugget. Can you hear me, Professor?
Yes, I can.
Okay, how's everything with you in the States now?
Will I be able to see the slides at the same time?
Okay.
I can see you all.
Okay, we'll arrange it.
I would like to see my...
Can you arrange the slides? Excuse me. Slide'larını görmek istiyorum.
Before. Something's happening.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Okay, now...
So, good morning to you all in Almaty. I'm honored to be a participant in this important conference, even if I'm at such a distance. I would have loved to have come to Almaty to be present there, since I've always dreamed of that wonderful city, and I've had, over the years, some wonderful students from Almaty. So, as the title suggests, the purpose of this paper is to investigate what explains what seemed to be a Central Asian trade puzzle. With whom does Central Asia trade, and do they trade too little or too much? And I'll explain the puzzle in a moment. And I would hope that this would lead us to some suggestions about policies for the future that would improve Central Asia's situation as well as neighboring countries. The puzzle. The history, as you know, much better than I do, there was the USSR, and when it broke up, its various parts went into a big decline, big recessions, but have, of course, recovered and have grown, in most cases, quite nicely in recent years. And new trade arrangements were developed so as to help develop the trade among these formerly single countries that were now countries but were part of a single country before, to help cooperation and trade, and then help them also trade with other countries. So the puzzle is that despite the expectation that if they started as a single country, that at the early stages of their independence, they would still be trading a lot with each other. They would be over traders, trading more than would normally be expected with each other, but they would be trading too little with the rest of the world. But the research that's been done, I identify several studies there, African development, or sorry, it should be the Asian Development Bank, not the African Development Bank, and those two authors there have done studies up through about 2000 or 2005, and argued that, or found that the 5 countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkey, their extra-regional trade was, they were trading more than would have been expected. So the purpose of this paper is to reinvestigate this, to see if in the light of more recent data, a more modern version, maybe more sophisticated version of the gravity model, which was the model used in that study, and I'll explain what that is in a moment, is Central Asia, Cassia undertrade? Can we find some clues, underlying clues, that would help explain why they undertrade or overtrade in certain cases? So that's the objective. So first of all, we introduced 3 different definitions of Central Asia. Cassia 5, the 5 countries I mentioned before. Cassia 7, so that's Cassia 5, Cassia 7, which adds Afghanistan and Azerbaijan. And then Cassia 9, which adds Iran and Turkey to the list. And we would have liked to go further and have a Cassia 11 that might include several other countries that we're leaving for future research. In any case, these are the 3 different definitions that we make use of in this paper. And so then our findings in brief, to show you what we get, these and help explain the puzzle. And we show modest differences in these findings across the 3 different definitions of Cassia that I mentioned before. So this table, perhaps the one thing just to call attention to in this table is that upper left-hand column that's at the top row that's looking at world trade and the share of Central Asian 5, the Cassia 5 countries in that. You can see it's risen, although very small. So that's far less than 1% of world trade, but it has increased very rapidly from 1995 to 2010. Going over to the right-hand side, you'll see there's also been an increase for the broader definition of Central Asia 9, also a sharp increase, but not as sharp an increase as in the Central Asia 5 definition. Just let me explain briefly that for those of you not familiar with it, what's known as a gravity model is it's trying to explain why some countries trade more with each other than others. And it's illustrated by this little diagram. We've got a small country A over here on the left, and it trades, it has a thin arrow trading to both region C and to region B, but those arrows are relatively thin. Whereas countries B and C are larger, they have larger mass, that's the notion of mass in gravity, and they're closer together to each other. So they have large arrows, whereas A has small arrows to both B and C. And a simple algebraic model that sort of captures the gist of this is to say that the transactions, the trade exchanges between country I and country J in logarithmic terms is a linear function of the log of the GDPs of country I and country J, gross domestic product, and then the distance between I and J. So that captures the basic idea of the gravity model. So, and various scholars, so it's a very, very simple idea. It's not the same as the kind of comparative advantage theories that were developed in sort of classical and neoclassical economics. But various scholars such as Leamer and Levinson have pointed out that the gravity model provides some of the clearest and most robust empirical findings in all of economics. So hence the use of the gravity model. So gravity model applications. So there's some that are sort of standard gravity model, and that's what we try to start with. And the basic idea, in addition to GDP and distance that I mentioned before, you get sort of proxies, therefore, for transport costs, whether two countries, but I and J, have a common border, whether one of them is an island economy, how large are the tariffs, whether they have a customs union or free trade agreement with each other, and then measures of sort of transaction costs that would make it easier for them to engage in transactions, whether they have a common language, whether they have a common legal system, common currency, common colonial relationship, or something of that sort. Now, the extended gravity model, which we're also going to use, is where one introduces differences in factor intensities between these two and factor endowments between the two partners, and some interaction terms capturing some of these. So that's part of the extended gravity model. The definition of basic to what we're looking at is whether there's undertrading or overtrading. Does Central Asia undertrade or overtrade with itself and with the rest of the world? And the definition of, we use the gravity model to compute the predicted trade flows between any two economies, I and J, and then we compare that with the actual trade flows. So if the actual trade flow is less than that would be predicted by the gravity model, we say that this pair of countries is under trading. It's trading less than would be predicted. But by contrast, if the actual trade was greater than we predicted, we'd say it's representing over trading. So this just identifies the data that we use for trade data, for the geographic kind of data, for national accounts data. And what it amounts to, we have data for over 200 countries, and it's a little bit less than this, about 20,000 trading pairs. And we're looking at the period 1990 to 2010. We kind of averaged each annual data into 3-year averages, and then break them into these 5-year intervals to capture changes over time. Estimation technique, it's probably not too relevant to the group, would be very interested in the details, but it's an estimation technique that's said to have some advantages over other estimation techniques that have been used. So again, this is this basic ingredients of what we're trying to estimate, the log in logarithmic terms, the trade between I and J, exports and imports, both exports and imports, with GDP of the two pairs of countries being on the right-hand side of the equation, the distance between them, and other characteristics of country I and country J, and then a dummy if they're members of this common group, like a free trade agreement, or if they're both Central Asian countries. We do this for both imports and exports, and as I say, for each of these 5-year periods. So this table, which I'm sure the numbers are too small for you to see, but the columns of the table are, the first column in every pair is imports and the second one is exports. And then these along the rows are the explanatory variables, the distance between the two countries, the GDP of the country of origin, the GDP of the country of destination of the trade pair, whether they have a common legal system, a common language, common colonial relationship, and so on, whether they have a common border, whether they're an island or not, how large is their area. And then this, where the arrow is a dummy variable for whether one of the countries is a Central Asian 5, one of those 5 Central Asian countries, and the other country is not. That's a dummy variable to represent that. And on the right-hand side is the same thing, the right-hand set of columns is the same thing, but with the Central Asia 9 configuration. And you will see, now below this, there's some more variables about the difference in GDPs between GDP per capita between these countries and several other variables, whether they're landlocked, about oil prices and time trends and so on. But the key one is here, this one in the middle where the arrow is, that's capturing. So these coefficients represent, so this is looking at the extra-regional trade of the Central Asian 5 countries. And we see, and this is the dummy variable, if one is a Central Asian country and the other is outside Central Asia. And we see the coefficient is negative, and from, if you can see it, it's highly significant. And it is the same across all these other entries that are the same model, but with different variables being added. So that's indicating that Central Asia is as an under-trader with respect to the rest of the world, both the Central Asia 5 and the broader Central Asia 9. It's sharper under-trader with the Central Asia 5 definition. Then in this next table 4, we look at we add some extra variables and in particular some interaction terms. So the 0, 1, and 2 are looking how this differs. This degree of under-trading varies with Cassia 5, Cassia 7, Cassia 9. The third row shows if we add using Cassia 7, the middle one, and we add a time trend to see, well, is this, so they were under traders in general for Cassia 7, but is this changing over time? And we see, yes, it is changing over time. There's an upward trend in Cassia 7. They're now trading more over time. Each time period, they're increasing but they started with a very negative situation, meaning that there was very much under trading with the rest of the world, but it's being overcome. And this is the same, but with respect to the broader definition of Cassia 9. The same pattern, but less striking differences. It is making up ground. It's increasing its intra-regional trading, or its extra-regional trading, but it's still lagging behind. The next table, and I'll go very briefly here, getting short on time, with the tables, just to point out that we also looked at whether there's under trading with the different regions. Which regions is there under trading and which regions are there over trading? And we generally find that there's under trading with respect to the US and the EU, and to some extent the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. It's a little bit mixed with the Pacific, what we call the PAC, the Pacific Rim countries. There's over trading on the import side with China, and is over trading on the import side with Russia, but in neither case, in the case of exports. Then the next table is looking at the same thing, but adding some interaction terms. And one thing to point out here is that we look at the interaction between the Cassia 9 dummy variable and differences in per capita income. This differences in factor endowments. And we find that while factor endowments, as indicated over here, differences in factor endowments between any pair of countries has a positive influence on trade in the case of the Central Asian countries. With respect to the EAEC term is very strong, Central Asia becomes an under trader. So further research years ahead for your region are going to be hard to distinguish between oil and non-oil, but nothing further. On the second question sounded like, if I understood it correctly, that you were expressing some difficulty in getting access to information about the new arrangement would be, what the plans are for the Euro-Asian, Central Asian Union, the Union, as after this one ends at the end of this year. And I guess that's because it hasn't been finally ratified. I don't know whether it has or not and what the details are, but I think that point, if people, if citizens, businessmen, if one can't get a hold of what the plans are, how to make decisions about investment, about trade, and so on. People want to know what the future is and what the rules are going to be and how it's going to work. I think that's of crucial importance, and I think that really needs to be made very clear as possible to everybody. Experience in working in the MENA region, North Africa and Middle East and North Africa, that has been an issue all the way along. I mean, they started in the 1960s with certain trade agreements among each other, but these weren't known. They were top-down agreements that were made between presidents, but you know, the firms didn't know what was involved, and people didn't know what was involved. You know, they were supposed to be trading on paper. They were supposed to be trading between places like Lebanon and Syria, but I would read every day in the paper that the trucks weren't getting across the border. So I do think that if I interpreted your question correctly, I'm very sympathetic to the idea. It really is important to make clear what's involved, what people have in mind in planning these agreements, and then make it clear to everybody. This should be on the internet and do all the different languages and spelled out what the plans are on a year-to-year basis, what's going on, and give some prospects of what it's going to be over the future, so people can make plans. Investors, firms can make plans for how to make better use of trade and factor mobility within the region. That's the end of my answer to that, and I hope if I didn't understand, please clarify and I'll try again.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor, for joining us for this forum.
Were you able to hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us? Can you hear me, Professor?